Hello everyone, I'm Ixalan, and welcome to the final video in Ixalan Limited Review Week on my channel. So far, you've seen me talk about all of the cards in the set in my full set limited review. Today, we're going to talk about the archetypes for the various color combinations within Ixalan, discussing the synergies and primary goals of each of the color pairs. In this video, we will only talk about synergies within color pairs, and I won't be talking about cards that are just good in every deck unless they're especially good in a particular color pair. If you want to see me talk about those cards that are just powerful in a vacuum, you can check out my full set limited review or my picks for the best commons and uncommons in the set over on EtherHub. This video tends to get a bit long, so in the description below you can find timestamps taking you to each of the archetypes. So, Ixalan is a tribal set, and the vast majority of decks in the format will fall within a color combination that supports one of the 4 tribes of Ixalan. While it is certainly possible to build 3 color decks with the first 2 tribes, the various color pairs within each of these shards also have slightly different goals, even if they are still built around that particular tribe. There are 2 color pairs that aren't listed here, blue-white and black-green. They are in many ways less supported than these are, but we will talk about the identity of those color pairs as well. Before we look at the specific identities of the color pairs within the Naya shard that the dinosaurs occupy, let's look at the cards that are general dinosaur payoffs across all 3 colors that fit well into any dinosaur deck. Let's start with commons and uncommons. So first we have Imperial Lancer. This is, I think, one of the worst dinosaur payoffs, unfortunately. It's just going to have double strike and probably not until turn 3 or 4, and that's just not that good. But it is a dinosaur payoff, and I have it here in interest of just showing you guys every payoff there is. Next, we have Kinjali's Collar. Now, this one's pretty good because it helps you ramp into your dinosaurs more quickly. Pterodon Knight gains flying if you have a dinosaur. Dinosaur Stampede is good because it gives your dinosaurs trample in addition to giving all your creatures +2/+0. Otepec Huntmaster, I think, is one of the best dinosaur payoffs. Making them cost less and being able to give them haste is a huge, huge difference. Kind of reminds me of Goblin Warchief. Thrash of Raptors is a nice common card with some dinosaur synergy. It gets +2/+0 in trample if you have a dinosaur, and that's a pretty good rate for 4 mana. Tilonali's Knight gets bigger also if you have dinosaurs. Commune with dinosaurs is nice. You have to be running a decent number of them, and you can just be casting it and getting dinosaurs off the top of your library. Someone in the comments of my limited review pointed out that if you have enough commune with dinosaurs and enough dinosaurs, you can actually stack the bottom of your deck and eventually just draw whatever it is you want to draw. And that's an interesting idea, and I think that could be plausible. You need a lot of communes, but that would be pretty cool. Next, Drover of the Mighty, another very good dinosaur payoff. It both ramps and gets bigger when you have dinosaurs. Savage Stomp is just a ridiculous card even if you don't have dinosaurs. If you do have dinosaurs, it's even stupider. Costing 1 mana for a fight effect that puts a +1/+1 counter on your guy is insane. There's also Thundering Spineback, which feels like it should be a rare almost. If you can ramp into it, it's great. It's a dinosaur lord that makes dinosaur tokens. There's also a few rares and mythics that fit best into this color pair. One of them being Awakening Sun's Avatar. It kills all non-dinosaurs, so that'll work out well for you if you're really there on dinosaurs. Priest of the Awakening Sun gains you life if you have a dinosaur in your hand every upkeep, and you can also use it to search up a dinosaur from your deck. And there's also Gishath Sun's Avatar, who sort of shows you that the dinosaur tribe is across these 3 colors. And is ridiculous. If you can play this, you're probably going to win. You get to cast dinosaurs for free off the top of your library every time it hits your opponent. Regisaur Alpha is great even if you don't have dinosaurs, but if you do, giving them all haste is nice. So those are all the dinosaur payoffs within this shard. Now we're going to talk about each individual color pair and what that color pair is interested in. They're all interested in dinosaurs, but they have different emphases within the dinosaur tribe. So let's start with red-green, where the signpost uncommon is Raging Swordtooth. Most of the color pairs within Ixalan have a signpost uncommon, and then the signpost uncommons are included by Wizards as a way of sort of indicating to you in limited what this color pair is interested in. And Raging Swordtooth is really strong. I actually think it might just be the best signpost uncommon in this set, just on its own. 5 mana for a 5/5 with trample that does 1 damage to each other creature is just great. Obviously, if you have 1 or 2 of these, you should be running fewer 1 toughness creatures, but it's a great card either way. And what it's really trying to hint to you is that not only do you care about dinosaurs, you care about the Enrage mechanic. And while Enrage shows up in white, I think on 1 card, Enrage is mostly in red and green, and it's on several cards in it. And I'll show you what Enrage is by just moving to the next slide here. These are all the dinosaurs that have Enrage that the Sword Tooth is good with. This includes Raptor Hatchling, who is a 2-mana 1/1, but one you feel fine about running because Enrage means you get to make a 3/3 dinosaur trample after it dies, and that's what Enrage is. Every time one of your creatures is damaged, you get an effect. And so when the Sword Tooth comes in and damages the whole board, if you have creatures with Enrage in play, you're going to get some free Enrage triggers. Similarly, Sun-Crowned Hunters does damage to your opponent when it gets hit. Snapping Sailback is just great. It's going to be a first pickable card in this format, and it's even better in this deck because you can get it a +1/+1 counter with ease when you play your Sword Tooth. Ranging Raptors is a little less exciting, but definitely a lot of value there. You get to search your library for a basic land card every single time it gets damaged. And Ravenous Daggertooth is the worst, I think, of all of these, and it's not bad, it's just not very good. I mean, it's an average card. 3 mana, 3/2 that gains you 2 life every time it's damaged. There's also one rare with Enrage, and that is Ripjaw Raptor, who is very strong. You get to draw a card every time it gets enraged. So what are some of the ways you can trigger Enrage in this format? So we already know about our Raging Swordtooth being a way to trigger Enrage, and it's probably the best way because it can trigger your whole board's Enrage, which is quite nice. There's also Ryle, which was printed basically specifically to trigger Enrage. You also give a creature trample and it replaces itself, but if you can cast this and get an Enrage trigger, you're pretty happy. There's Atsokan Archer, who has a lot of flexibility. I mean, it can kill an X1 with its fight effect. It's a decent blocker, even if you can't do anything else with it. But I think its ideal use is to use it on a creature with Enrage. A lot of them actually only have 3 power. In my set review, I said, the Archer can't survive combat, can't survive fighting with a lot of the dinosaurs. Turns out it can. A number of them only have 3 power, so the Archer can actually activate Enrage without getting itself killed. Pounce is an instant speed fight spell, and fight spells are going to be extra good with your creatures with Enrage because they're probably going to kill your opponent's creature, but you're also going to get an Enrage trigger. Same goes for Savage Stomp, which we've already seen, but it's especially good here. And there's also Dual Shot, which is less good, really, than any of these are. But, if you can kill your opponent's, one of your opponent's X1s, and trigger an Enrage on one of your creatures, or trigger 2 creatures with Enrage with it, you're getting some pretty good value out of the card. I wouldn't always run it like I would basically these other 5 cards in any Enrage deck, but it's all right. So that's it, really, for the red-green Enrage deck. At its core, it's a dinosaur deck. You want all the dinosaur synergies you can get, but you also want to get some Enrage synergies. It's sort of the sub-theme within the color pair. Now let's move into green-white, which also cares about dinosaurs, but it's a little bit different. Here, the signpost common is Belligerent Brontodon, which is a huge creature, a dinosaur, of course, because this color pair also cares about dinosaurs. And this one says each creature you control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. So it's kind of disappointing because this would have been a pretty cool archetype, and I mean, it still is, I guess. But this is not a very well-supported one. There's really not any other synergy other than the Brontodon for caring about high toughness. There's a little bit, but there's hardly any. And so I think a green-white deck is less frequently going to actually be this sort of big butts, high toughness deck, and more frequently just be a dinosaur deck that has maybe a very minor sub-theme when it comes to toughness. But the reality is, Belligerent Brontodon itself isn't even actually that good. It's effectively a 7-mana 6/6 because of the text on it. And yeah, it'll help your creatures with big butts be better. But that's it. It's a very weak signpost uncommon, which I don't usually say. Usually the signpost uncommons are all quite strong and very playable. Not really the case here. This is not the kind that you go after and you're like, oh boy, this color pair is open. But anyway, let's go ahead and look at some dinosaurs that have big butts that work with Belligerent Brontodon. There are a few of them. We have, for example, Bellowing Aegisaur, who's great, and by the way, you can splash in the black-red Enrage deck. It's the one creature with Enrage in white, and it's very strong. But it also has a huge butt. It's, if you can effectively make it a 6-mana 5/5 with that text, that's pretty good. Looming Altasaur is one of the best things you could possibly do if you actually get this deck together because it becomes a 7/7. And it can also block until then. Shining Aerosaur becomes a 5-mana 4/4 effectively. Steadfast Armasaur cares about its own toughness, so it's one of the other cards that sort of fits here, but it doesn't really, it's not a payoff for having high toughness because it doesn't pump other creatures' toughness, it doesn't make other creatures care about toughness, it just cares about its own toughness, and it's a good card. But it is, of course, even better here because it'll be a 3/3 effectively. Same thing for Territorial Hammer Skull, it'll basically be a 3/3. Grazing Whiptail will basically be a 4/4. Ranging Raptors, who we've seen, will basically be a 3-mana 3/3. But that's pretty much it. There's not any other cards at common or uncommon that pay you off for having high toughness. There is the Green Sun's Avatar, who cares about toughness in rare, but it's also not really that good. I mean, it's a good card, but it's not excellent. Not enough for you to be like, man, I'm going to build this big butts deck. So most of the time, as I said, this deck will just be a dinosaur deck looking for dinosaur synergies, and occasionally maybe you'll pull it together and you'll actually care about high toughness, but it's not going to happen regularly like it's going to happen with the Enrage deck, where you have enough payoffs and enough ways of enabling it that it's an actual supported deck. So let's move to the final color pair within the Naya Shard, which is red-white dinosaurs, but aggro this time. So the signpost uncommon here is a 2-mana 2/2 with Flying and Menace. It's a pretty good card. It'll attack early, does damage. This is basically the color pair that it's always this, basically. Red-white is always some variation on aggro. Here it has a tribal element of dinosaurs. And there are some dinosaurs. Obviously, all dinosaurs are going to be good in this deck because you're going to have other dinosaur synergies like we talked about at the beginning. But there are some dinosaurs that I think are at their best in this deck, because this deck, unlike the others, doesn't really want to be running a ton of like 5 drops or anything like that. It wants to cap out around 4 probably and only have 1 or 2 creatures there. The deck's just low curve and kills you with early aggressive dinosaurs like the Sky Terror here. So let's look at some of the dinosaurs that are best suited for this deck, while keeping in mind that any dinosaur will work in this deck because you're going to find dinosaur synergies within this color pair. So first we have Bonded Horncrest. Obviously this is definitely at its best here because he's terrible if you can't be attacking with him, and this deck will be able to because of the fact that it'll have lots of other creatures. Dinosaur Stampede is probably at its best here because giving them all trample and +2/+0 can just end a game if you're sort of going wide with a bunch of lower curve dinosaurs. Frenzied Raptor is nothing special, but this is certainly where it will be best, a 3-mana 4/2. Tilonali's Knight, we've seen before. It's not actually a dinosaur, but it cares about them, and it gets to be much more aggressive when you have them. Thrash of Raptors, we've seen him too, but he's pretty good in this deck because he gets to be a very aggressive and powerful creature if you have other dinosaurs. Raptor Companion, going to be fine in any dinosaur deck, but here, having a 2-mana 3/1 who carries that creature type is a big deal. Imperial Aerosaur, going to be great in any white deck, actually. It doesn't even have to be a dinosaur deck. However, it is good in this deck because it makes you do a whole lot of extra damage. And Territorial Hammerskull, I think, is great in this deck. It sort of removes a blocker out of the way. Again, there's lots of other dinosaurs I don't have listed here. These are just the ones that I think have the best, are going to be at their best in this color pair. And of course, by the way, you can actually play all 3 of these colors together because there's splashing and fixing sources. And playing all 3 together is probably going to be sort of ideal, especially if you're splashing for one of the gold cards, although you probably don't want it to be the Brontosaur, but there's a lot of the time this is going to be a 3-color deck. I was just trying to point out that there's certain identities within each of the color pairs that are a little bit different, and no matter how you end up building your deck, even if you're 3 colors, chances are you're going to be leaning towards one of these identities a little more than the others, whether it's more Enrage or whether it's a lower curve, more aggressive deck. So that does it for the Dinosaur Shard. Now let's look at the other tribe that is contained all within a single shard, and that is Pirates, who are all in Grixis. Just like I did with the dinosaurs, we're going to talk about all the payoffs across these 3 colors for running pirates, having pirates in play, etc., before we get into the individual identity of each of these color pairs. So we've got Lookout's Dispersal, which becomes very good if you have pirates. It becomes better than Mana Leak, and that's pretty solid. It's a card you'll play happily in any pirate deck. We've also got Siren's Ruse. This card's basically unplayable unless you're in a pirate deck, so it's the kind of card that you can probably get a copy of without trying too hard. It allows you to exile things, and we'll see that some of the pirates have Enter the Battlefield abilities because it exiles them and makes them come back into play. And if it's a pirate, you draw a card, so you're going to get insane value if you're getting an Enter the Battlefield trigger and drawing a card. Next, there is March of the Drowned, which is another very good pirate payoff at common. If you have a lot of pirates in your deck, this becomes a 1 black mana way to return 2 creatures from your graveyard, which is really good. So yeah, this is a great pirate payoff, and it's only at common, which is nice because it won't be that hard for you to get. Fiery Cannonade is a card that works well in a pirate deck because your pirates won't be damaged by it, which, by the way, Fiery Cannonade can also be pretty good in the dinosaur deck because you can trigger a bunch of Enrage at once, but it's going to be better here. You know, it's a sweeper, one-sided sweeper for small creatures. Most of your guys will survive if you got there on a pirate deck. Headstrong Brute, another pirate payoff. Not incredibly exciting, but hey, adding menace to this guy is relevant and a nice thing to do. Lightning Rig Crew, I think, is the best pirate payoff in the set. I think he's actually a first pickable pirate payoff because unlike some of these cards, it's good regardless of whether or not you end up with pirates. It's excellent once you do have pirates. You get to slowly ping your opponent to death, and you know you have a decent blocker as well. So those are the pirate payoffs at common and uncommon across these three colors, and there actually aren't a ton of them, but there are a few more at rare. You've got Fathom Fleet Captain, who can make tokens more effectively when, well, you can make them, period. You can't make them without having another pirate in play. Admiral Beckett Brass, of course, is the Lord, who's insane. Lets you steal things if you hit your opponent with enough pirates. And Dreamcaller Siren is great, too. It's a 4-mana 3/3 with flying and flash, which is already great. But if you have a pirate, you can also tap down 2 non-land permanents when you play it. So not a ton of payoffs for pirates, but I do think the ones that are there, especially like Lookout's Dispersal, Lightning Rig Crew, and Fiery Cannonade, and March of the Drowned are quite powerful. So that's the good news for pirates. But each color pair within the pirate shard has its own identity to a certain extent, the same way Dinosaurs did. So let's start with Blue-Black. With Blue-Black, it's going to be about making treasure and having artifacts, which is weird because making treasure means this color pair is actually sort of about ramping and color fixing, being able to play whatever cards you want, which is a strange thing to say about Blue-Black, but that is what it is. Deadeye Plunderers here is the Signpost Uncommon. It gets bigger the more artifacts you have in play, and the idea is that you're going to have treasures in play mostly. It even makes its own treasures for 4-mana investment. And it can get quite large. I mean, you can get treasure in play without too much effort. We're going to see that Blue-Black is just loaded with treasure. This is a color pair where it's everywhere. Red has a little bit of it, but it only has 1 rare and 1 uncommon that make treasure. All the rest of it is in Blue-Black, more or less. So Deadeye Plunderers sort of signifies that, and so does the fact that the treasure is mostly concentrated in this color pair. So let's go ahead and look at the other cards that can make treasure that synergize well with the Deadeye Plunderers here. So, Depths of Desire, a nice bounce spell that happens to give you treasure. That's some nice additional upside. Pirate's Prize, a mediocre draw spell that happens to give you treasure. Okay. Prosperous Pirates I like a lot. Paying him on turn 5 is a 3/4 that gives you 2 treasures, and suddenly you can just ramp into whatever is pretty nice. Sailor of Means is just a decent creature for its stats that makes a treasure token when it comes into play. Contract Killing is a solid removal spell that gives you treasure. That's some nice additional upside. Dire Fleet Hoarder, you know, 2 mana, 2/1. When it dies, it gives you treasure. Heartless Pillage, I'm less excited about than most of these. You have to raid to really get online with getting the treasure, and it's just Mind Rot, which isn't that exciting of a card usually. Ruthless Knave is one of the better treasure payoffs at common or uncommon, though. He lets you make treasures whenever you want to if you have a creature to sacrifice, and you can draw a card for every 3 treasures you sacrifice. There are also some rares that allow you to make treasure or gain advantage because of them. Treasure Map, for example, once it transforms, gives you 3 treasures, and it transforms into Treasure Cove, which is also a treasure payoff, and probably the best one in the set at any rarity. A single treasure becomes draw a card, and that is kind of nuts. There's also Spell Swindle, which is a huge counter spell, but if you counter something big, you do get a ton of treasure. Also, I'm including Captain Lannery's Storm here. She is red, and she'll be fine in a red deck too. However, you can splash her pretty easily in this deck, and where she's going to be the most potent is when you just have a stack of treasure in play, and Captain Lannery's Storm isn't going to have that opportunity in most red decks. So what are some of the payoffs for having treasure and artifacts? Well, we have our friend Deadeye Plunderers again. Another one is Deadeye Quartermaster. It's not a big treasure payoff in reality, but you're also going to be wanting to run maybe Pirate's Cutlass in this deck more than any others because cards care about artifacts. And there's vehicles in this format that are all pretty solid, and it can find those too. If you have 2 targets, Deadeye Quartermaster can get them, and this is the color pair where that'll mean the most because you have cards like Deadeye Plunderers who like artifacts. Costly Plunder I like. It lets you turn a treasure into draw 2 cards, basically. You're not going to be wanting to sacrifice a creature usually, so it's a big payoff for just having treasure laying around. Desperate Castaways gets better if you have artifacts in play because it can actually attack. We also have our friend here, Ruthless Knave, who can make treasure and is a treasure payoff. So those are all things to keep in mind. There's also, of course, the build around card that lets you just win the game if you have enough treasures in play and gives you a treasure every time a creature dies. And this is obviously the best place for it as well, because you can make a lot of treasure in this color pair. So because this color pair is probably going to be the best at splashing, which again is a weird thing to say about blue-black, but I think it's actually true because of all the access to treasures. You also just want to be taking sometimes just the best cards out of packs if they're strong enough, because your deck can cast them even if they're not your primary color. So cards like Ixalan's Binding you can take and be able to splash in this deck. Same with Pious Interdiction, Lightning Strike. Makeshift Munitions is actually sort of a build around for treasure, and so splashing it in this deck is especially potent, I think, because if you can just start turning your treasure into 1 damage, that gets to be pretty good. Snapping Sailback, card we've seen already that's very strong. Savage Stomp, the same thing. There's also a lot of rares. If any rare is very strong and has 1 color, you can splash it in this deck and feel pretty good about it. This deck can also ramp, weirdly enough, so sometimes you also can even play some high curve creatures that you're just splashing, and that's going to be one of the ways this deck wins a lot of the time, I think. So let's move on to the blue-red color pair within the Grixis Shard. Blue-red is also about pirates, of course, but it's less about treasure. There's a little bit of treasure. You have access to blue and you have access to red. They both make treasure, but not at the same level that blue-black does. But the big thing here is raid. So our Signpost uncommon here is Marauding Looter, just a 4 mana 4/3, which is solid stats, but it has a continuous raid effect. Unlike a lot of the cards with raid that we're about to look at, this happens every turn. It doesn't just happen once, and you get to loot every time you attack with a creature at the end of your turn, and that's pretty good. It's a nice payoff for raiding, and most of the creatures with raid in this set are pirates, which makes sense flavor-wise. So let's look at the pirates that also have raid, that fit well into a deck alongside Marauding Looter, where you're going to be wanting to try to raid. So Chart of Course does not actually say raid on it, but it basically has raid. You get to draw 2 cards, and then if you attack with a creature, you get to keep both of them instead of discarding 1. So it's an aggressive draw spell, which is a unique design, and one that fits well into this deck. It's actually a very strong card if you can always be attacking. Navigator's Ruin, though, is, I mean, I have it here in the interest of being complete and showing you everything with raid, but Navigator's Ruin's terrible. I'm sorry. You're not going to mill people. It's bad. Don't play it. You'd rather just be playing a 3-drop pirate or whatever. Next, we have Shipwreck Looter, a 2 mana 2/1, who also loots when you raid, but only does it once, unlike our Signpost uncommon. Stormfleet Aerialist is nice for 2 reasons. Not only does it have raid, so that fits well into this deck, well, I guess for 3 reasons. It also has a +1/+1 counter, which some cards care about. And finally, it can also help you trigger raid because it's an early creature with flying. So sometimes you'll play it as a 2 mana 1/2 just to start getting your raid going. Stormfleet Spy is a great raid payoff. You get to draw a card if you attacked. Fire Cannon Blast is already a good card, but it becomes amazing when you can do 6 damage with it instead. Rigging Runner gets to be a 2/2 first strike if you've attacked this turn. Stormfleet Arsonist, not the most exciting, but hey, he's got raid, and occasionally making your opponent sacrifice a permanent does make a pretty big difference. Most of the time they're going to just pitch like a land or something, but, you know, could be worse. Meanwhile, Stormfleet Pyromancer, I think, is one of the best raid payoffs because it basically kills things when it comes into play. If you've raided, you can even dome your opponent, and I like that a lot. There's also some rares that like raiding, or have raid, and I guess there's only one, actually, and it's Repeating Barrage, which for 1 generic and 2 red does 3 damage, and it can keep coming back if you keep on raiding. So there's some easy ways to enable raid, other than just, you know, attacking with creatures. There's some creatures that are especially well suited to enable raid in the early game and sort of just start you on a chain reaction of playing all these other creatures with raid. And these are those. Siren Stormtamer is a 1 mana 1/1 with flying who has some real upside because in the late game it's still relevant. Water Trap Weaver helps you tap down an opponent's creature so you can attack and enable raid. River Sneak's unblockable. I do think it's going to be way better in a Merfolk deck than here, but it is unblockable and it can keep triggering raid. Fire Shrine Keeper is a 1 mana 1/1 with Menace who usually is probably going to get in for damage on turn 2 and turn 3, giving you two early raid triggers. So again, raid is really just a sub-theme, and so is the treasure thing. I'm sort of telling you about the sub-themes within what is basically a tribal color pair, and here it's going to be even easier to play all 3 colors because of treasure, but you'll still sort of be leaning more towards cards that help you with raid, cards that help you with treasure. But there's still one other color pair within this shard, and that is black-red. And black-red is sort of the straightforward color pair in this shard, like red-white was for the dinosaurs. It is just an aggro deck, and Dire Fleet Captain embodies that. He's a 2-mana 2/2, but when he attacks, he gets +1/+1 for each other attacking pirate. So it wants you to be turning all your pirates sideways and quickly killing them, and Dire Fleet Captain can certainly enable that. So let's look at some pirates that are especially well suited for this deck because they're lower on the curve or have certain aggressive things going on. So Dire Fleet Hoarder will be fine in this deck. A 2-mana 2/1 is going to be good in any deck. It also makes treasure, which doesn't hurt. But playing as many pirates as you can in the early game is basically what this deck wants to do. Desperate Castaways, same thing. Wanted Scoundrels is especially well suited here. I think this is basically the only deck you want to be playing in because this deck plans on being so fast that your opponent having extra treasure if they kill your Scoundrels doesn't matter. Meanwhile, you have a 4/3 for 2 mana. There's also Fathom Fleet Firebrand is just a 2-mana 2/2 with some upside. Our friend Rigging Runner again. Again, any pirates can fit into this deck. These are just some of the ones that come to mind as being at their best in an aggro deck, looking to play lots of 2s and 3s over some of the higher curve creatures we've talked about. But again, you know, this color pair and is actually part of a shard, and you can really play all 3 colors and be splashing one, or you can probably go pretty deep into all 3 thanks to treasure. But that does it for the pirates. All right, so we've covered the 2 sort of main tribes on this plane who each occupy an entire shard, and now we're going to look at the other 2 tribes, the 2 that only occupy a single color pair. First of these we'll look at is blue-green Merfolk. So it's all there in the name. This deck is about making Merfolk and having Merfolk in play and Merfolk synergy. However, when you look at the signpost uncommon here, you're seeing a little something extra. Not only is this card a Merfolk, it also happens to really care about +1/+1 counters. You can put them on your creatures, you can remove them from creatures to draw a card. It's actually a lot like Simic Guildmage, which was a strong card in Limited back in the day. And so there's actually a sub-theme within Merfolk of +1/+1 counters. So blue-green cares about +1/+1 counters, and it also cares about Merfolk. So just like all of the other color pairs we've talked about so far, sort of tribal first and have a sub-theme, that's what we have here too. It's Merfolk first, but hey, if you can get some +1/+1 counters around too, will be even better. So let's look at some of the payoffs for Merfolk. I think one of the biggest build-arounds for the entire deck is Deep-Root Waters, because if you can get 10 Merfolk in your deck, it's going to be insane. Making Merfolk creature tokens with hexproof sounds like a lot of fun. We have our friend River Sneak, who gets to be much better in this deck than it would be in a pirate deck. Because if you're paying a Merfolk, let's say 1 a turn, or 1 even every other turn, it's going to hit harder more frequently. It actually works really well with Deep-Root Waters. That's a pretty gross combo you can assemble. They're both uncommon, so it's entirely doable, where you play 1 Merfolk, which means you get 2, and so River Sneak is a 3/3 every time it's attacking. Shaper Apprentice is a nice common Merfolk payoff. It's just a 2-mana 2/1, but if you have another Merfolk, it gains flying. Kumena's Speaker is just a 1-mana 1/1 most of the time, but if you either have a Merfolk or an island, it gets to be a 2/2. It's not the most exciting of these because in the late game it doesn't become that impressive, but if you can have it consistently swinging as a 2/2 on turn 2, you're going to be in pretty good shape. Jade Guardian is our first hint at sort of combining both the +1/+1 counter aspect and the Merfolk aspect on one of these payoffs. Jade Guardian, you know, comes into play and puts a +1/+1 counter on a Merfolk. It can put it on itself in a pinch, but it's usually going to be better to put it somewhere else, maybe a River Sneak or something like that. But a 3/3 with hexproof isn't bad. There's also River Herald's Boon, which is a nice little combat trick, but if you don't actually have Merfolk, it's not worth playing. But if you do, you get to put 2 +1/+1s on creatures because you have a Merfolk in play, so you can put 1 on it and 1 on another creature, or you could also put both on a single creature if you really want to. Vine Shaper Mystic is a very strong Merfolk payoff, perhaps the strongest, probably the strongest. When it comes into play, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target Merfolk, of course. It can put 1 on itself in a pinch, even if you have no other Merfolk, but if you have another Merfolk in play, obviously it gets better. There's also a rare Merfolk payoff, but it's honestly underwhelming, and, you know, I think like Jade Guardian and Vine Shaper Mystic and Deep-Root Waters are all probably better Merfolk payoffs, which is sad because this is a rare. It just makes your Merfolk harder to kill, which is certainly relevant, but not amazing. But, you know, if you're in this deck, it's not a bad card to take. Now, let's look at all the Merfolk in the set to get a feel for how often you'll be able to make cards like these as good as they can be. So, we have Headwater Sentries, just a generic Merfolk. You'll only be playing it in this deck if you really didn't get any others. Storm Sculptor is pretty nice. You can abuse it with Enter the Battlefield effects if you want to. And it's also just a creature that's unblockable. Another one that's not bad. Tempest Caller is quite good. It's the kind of card that can just end a game when you tap down all of your opponent's creatures. Also happens to be a Merfolk, of course. Water Trap Weaver, something we've seen already. It's going to be great tempo. You get to play a creature and tap down one of your opponents for a couple turns, and that's pretty nice. Wind Strider, just, 5 mana, 3/3 with flash and flying. Not exciting, but, it's fine, especially if you have Merfolk synergies. Deeproot Warrior, a nice little 2-drop. This deck can definitely be aggressive, and having a 2-drop that other 2/2s can't block isn't a bad place to be. Jungle Delver is another Merfolk that lets you know that +1/+1 counters matter here. He can put them on himself. It's a nice mana sink in the late game. Merfolk Branchwalker explores, and that reminds me that blue-green, while I don't think it's like the best place for Explore, is a nice supporting place for Explore because you get +1/+1 counters with it sometimes, and that doesn't hurt, especially if you have the gold card that can cash them in for various things. Same with Tishana's Wayfinder, a Merfolk who explores. There's also some rares who are Merfolk. Deeproot Champion's an interesting one. I've read the article where they talked about sort of the original ideas about the set, and Deeproot Champion seems like something that was a carryover because originally they were going to make the thing for Merfolk be prowess, not +1/+1 counters. But they took it away. But Deeproot Champion still has a non-creature spell trigger, which is definitely weird for a Merfolk in green. But it has that, and it does also get +1/+1 counters. Waker of the Wilds is excellent. It's a great mana sink where you can turn your lands into creatures, who, by the way, get +1/+1 counters. And sort of the best build around for the +1/+1 counter aspect of the deck, also a rare, is Herald of the Secret Streams. Just making your guys unblockable is gross. So that's Merfolk. They care about +1/+1 counters. They care about other Merfolk. And that's just, what they have going on. It looks like a solid color pair to me. Let's move now to the other color pair that contains only one tribe, and that is black-white. And its theme is vampires. So here it's shown to you very clearly with Call to the Feast. The goal is to put vampires into play. It also has sort of 2 sub-themes within it. One of them is going wide. This card here makes 3 1/1 vampires. There's other cards that make additional vampire bodies for various reasons. And the other sort of sub-theme is lifelink, life gain in general. While there's not like any cards that say, whenever you gain life, X happens, there are a lot of cards that gain you life, and there are some cards that ask you to pay life for an effect, and that's not going to hurt as much if you're gaining life. So let's look at some of the other vampire payoffs. We have Anointed Deacon, for example, who gives +2/+0 to a vampire until end of turn at the beginning of combat. That means he can make himself a 5/3, but more ideally, you're either giving a vampire with flying the +2/+0 or one of those 1/1 lifelink tokens, which it's not easy to block in a lot of situations. Bishop of the Bloodstained is like terrible if you don't have enough vampires, but if you're going really wide with your vampires, which is the ideal thing to do here, playing him and draining your opponent 5 or 6 doesn't seem crazy, and I'm positive even, that at some point in this format I'm going to lose to someone who has like 11 vampires in play when they play Bishop of the Bloodstained. Hopefully I can win that way too, but it can definitely just one-shot people in some scenarios. Deathless Ancient, I think, is one of the best vampire payoffs. It's a 6 mana 4/4 flyer, which is already quite good. And if you have enough vampires in play, because you've made enough vampire tokens, or just have vampires in play, you can return it to your hand, which is pretty gross. A 4/4 flyer that just keeps coming back into play no matter what you do to it is kind of a problem. There's also a rare payoff in black that's also very, very good, and I think is actually first pickable because its floor is high enough and its ceiling is very high. It makes all of your vampires drain your opponent 1 life when they attack, and that's pretty nice. There's Duskborn Sky Marcher, which can pump attacking vampires, which certainly doesn't hurt. It also can get in the air for a little while. It's not a bad thing for the Deacon to be pumping, for example. Vampire Zeal is a combat trick that gets better if you're using it on a vampire because it gives it first strike. At rare, we have Mavrin Fane Dusk Apostle, who makes 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink every time. Well, not every time, actually. This is a good point here. During any attack you have where at least one vampire is attacking, you get a 1/1 white vampire creature token with lifelink. You don't get one for each attacker, so just keep that in mind. Still a very good card, because if this deck has vampires in it, you're going to get a free 1/1 with lifelink most turns, just because you attacked. So as I said, the sort of sub-theme within vampires is, lifelink and going wide, but the other thing it wants to do is just play vampires, because you get extra value for that. So Danto Vanguard's a good one for you to play. It's very hard to block, and you can even make it block and be indestructible on defense, although 1/1 with indestructible is not that scary. And that's one of the cards I was talking about, where you pay life, and if you're gaining some life, paying 4 isn't going to be as big of a deal. Speaking of gaining life, there's a 2-mana 2/2 with lifelink and Bishop Soldier. Glorifier of Dusk is a build your own Sarah Angel, and again, you can pay life here, and you're not going to be too worried about it. Inspiring Cleric is another vampire who sort of lets you know, yeah, you're going to be gaining some life. It gains you 4 life when it comes into play, and it happens to be a vampire. Legion Conquistador is nice. You definitely have to be running more than 1 for it to be worth it. 3 or 4, and it seems pretty good to me. It's another way of sort of going wide with vampires, not in the sense that you're like playing creature tokens, but in the sense that you're drawing all these extra cards and they're all vampires. Paladin of the Bloodstain does help you go wide. Not only is he a vampire, but he gives you one of those lifelink vampire tokens when it comes into play. Queen's Commission just makes vampire tokens. Skyblade of the Legion, nothing special, but hey, it's a vampire with decent stats. And our friend Mavrin Fane Dusk Apostles here again. Queen's Agent, it explores and it happens to be a vampire. A 2-mana 2/2 that happens to be a vampire isn't bad either. Skymarch Bloodletter drains your opponent a little bit, and it's a decent attacker in the air. I hate Vicious Conquistador, and I'm probably almost never going to play him. But if there's any way you play him, it'll probably be in this deck because he's an early drop vampire. Bloodcrazed Paladin is a vampire. Vona, Butcher of Magan, is a vampire, and Bishop of Rebirth are 2. And all 3 of those are very powerful rares. But that's it for vampires. You know, it's just a tribal deck with some nice tribal payoffs that also happens to be good at gaining life and going wide. So now we're going to move to the last 2 color pairs, the 2 that don't have a tribal identity in the same way, and they're black-green and blue-white. And both of them are sort of reliant on certain uncommons for them to be at their best. So let's go ahead and look at black-green first. While Explore occurs in some numbers across all of the color pairs, black-green is where you can find a critical mass of it. It is no coincidence then that the only 2 common or uncommon cards that are explicitly pay off for Explore, whether or not you get the +1/+1 counter, are found in black and green. While Explore is the main thing this color pair has going on, there's also something else. Remember, Explore lets you put cards in your graveyard. Well, the card Grim Captain's Call here is probably best in this color pair between the focus on Explore and the mere fact that this color pair overlaps into all 4 creature types. Black has pirates and vampires, green has dinosaurs and merfolk, so returning all 4 with Grim Captain's Call is going to be the most plausible here. And obviously Lurking Chupacabra and Wild Growth Walker are very powerful build-arounds for prowess decks. If you can get a couple copies of both of those and a Grim Captain's Call, this deck, despite not having any tribal identity like everyone else is going to be very good. And it's going to be a fun deck. Exploring and getting value out of it seems awesome. We've already seen most of the creatures with Explore. We don't need to go into them in more detail here, but trust me, there's a lot of them in black and green. And if you manage to get Chupacabra and Walker online, you're going to be in great shape. Grim Captain's Call is also the kind of card that can basically win a game on its own if you happen to actually have 1 creature of each type in your graveyard, which again is the most plausible in this color pair. So the final color pair for us to look at is blue-white, which also does not have a signpost uncommon, but it has a clearly delineated strategy, and it's one we've seen blue-white do a lot, and that is blue-white skies. The key card here is Favorable Winds. Giving all your creatures flying with flying +1/+1 is excellent. We've seen it before. We've seen it as a build-around limited before. It was good then, and it's going to be good now. Pumping your guys is just awesome. Favorable Winds really enables that. And there's also some other just strong flyers in this color pair. We've got Air Elemental here and Imperial Aerosaur, who gives another creature flying when it comes into play, in addition to having flying itself. And so this deck is all about blue-white skies. There's more flyers in this color pair than anywhere else. And the key card here, instead of there being sort of 2 or 3, is basically just Favorable Winds. If you can pick up a couple of those, or you know, if you're drafting and you realize you have blue and white cards and they're mostly flyers, picking up Favorable Winds will greatly increase in your priority. Like if you're done with pack 1 and you have like 6 or 7 flyers, picking Favorable Winds in the next pack is not a bad idea. It's just that strong. So the last 2 color pairs are fairly reliant on getting some powerful uncommons to work, and I don't think you really should go into them unless you find yourself really taking advantage of the build-arounds in those color pairs. But when you do, I think they have the potential to be incredibly powerful. Meanwhile, the 4 tribes of Ixalan are all very well supported and will probably be what you draft the majority of the time. Well, that does it for Ixalan Limited Review Week content on my channel. I hope all of these videos help you guys do well at your pre-releases and in the format in general. While Limited Review of Ixalan is over, I'm certainly not done talking about the format, as starting next week I'll be back with my 2 weekly draft videos in the new format, and the week after that I will start doing crack-a-packs with Ixalan and talking about what I would first pick. So if you haven't already, subscribe to make sure you catch all of my future Ixalan content. Also, this video was sponsored by 5colorcombo.com, a great website for all things Magic. You can use my discount code NEATZone5 there for a 5% discount. They also have a great app for helping you practice drafting the new format, where you can try out a few of these archetypes. You can find it in the App Store by searching for 5Color Combo. Thanks for watching.